Think about how long ago the Founding Fathers were. Think about how long ago was the Declaration of Independence. There are more years between Christopher Columbus and the Founding Fathers than the Founding Fathers and us. The history of the United States comes from the first English settlers. That didn't happen till 1607, over 100 years after Columbus's initial voyage. He never landed in North America. Certainly had nothing to do with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and yet there's this propaganda that in order to love America, you somehow have to hitch your wagon to this idea that Christopher Columbus was some kind of hero that made it all happen. That is an absolute lie. And it's sad that Steven Crowder decided to drink Dennis Prager's Kool-Aid and make one of the dumbest videos Dennis Prager, his Prager University's ever made. And that's a pretty tall mountain to climb. One of the dumbest videos out of Prager University.
Thanksgiving, Independence Day, Memorial Day. Holidays are a great time to riddle Americans with needless oppressive guilt. But the one that stands head and shoulders above the rest is Columbus Day. The day where progressives indoctrinate your children into believing Columbus to be Satan incarnate, the USA to be his evil spawn, and the Native Americans to be pacifists.
Once again, more years between Christopher Columbus and the Founding Fathers than the Founding Fathers and us. Had nothing to do with this country. It's not America had nothing to do with Columbus. Columbus had nothing to do with America. He's trying to make this tie that just isn't there. And then that it's somehow some kind of propaganda that Christopher Columbus was a mass murdering psychopath. No, it's actual history. If you research the history, that's what you find. And you find it from primary sources of history, including Columbus's own letters and people that came after him that talked about how brutal he was. This is learning history. If you truly learn the history of Christopher Columbus, this is what you're going to find. It has nothing to do with any kind of leftist, progressive, whatever he wants to call it, diabolical scheme. It's simply learning about what you weren't told in high school. Learning real history, not the sugar-coated history where a bunch of stuff was left out. Learning real history.
And so now we have Indigenous Peoples Day, or as it would have been named 30 years ago, Aboriginals Day, or as it would have been named 10 or 15 years ago, Native Americans Day, or as it could be named tomorrow in Canada, First Nation Peoples Day. Feeling the urge to self-inflict grievous bodily harm yet? That's only natural because the whole charade has become an exercise in hating Western civilization, which is really just an exercise in hating yourself.
Oh my gosh. Let's say you had a neighbor. His name was John Wayne Gacy. And you knew John, you waved to him, occasionally you had a conversation. You liked John. And then you found out that John Wayne Gacy was a mass murderer who had a bunch of bodies of kids in his basement. And then after finding that out, I don't like that guy anymore. Now that wouldn't mean you hate all your neighbors, or you hate yourself, or you hate your country. There's just this guy that you used to like, and then you found out, I don't know, he was a mass murderer, and I guess because you're a little bit fickle, I guess, for some reason that was a deal breaker, and now you just don't like the guy anymore.
First, as far as Columbus goes, the guy deserves some credit, right? Flawed, to be sure, but he was the greatest navigator of his age, the first person to cross the Atlantic from the continent of Europe, and he did so without any maps and only 3 small ships.
Oh yeah, fantastic navigator. Look at a world map. Imagine leaving Spain and heading west. How are you going to miss the Americas? How are you going to miss? And don't forget, Christopher Columbus was a complete idiot about the circumference of the earth. He thought the earth was some kind of pear-shaped, idiotic thinking. I mean, think about, he landed in the Bahamas. He thought that was India. Think about how far the Bahamas are from India. And this guy was some kind of genius. Seriously, somebody leaves Europe, sails from Europe, heads west. How are they not going to land somewhere? He was lost. He had this idiotic belief about the size of the earth. If the Americas weren't here, him and his men all would have died. This guy was not a genius by any means. Once again, look at the map. Leaving Europe. Hard to miss. Hard to miss the Americas. And don't forget, this is all because of the fall of Constantinople and the need for new trade routes. So this was going to happen. If Columbus was never born, this is going to happen. Sail west, you're going to hit the Americas.
If you can name them, by the way, comment below, as I'm sure your professor can't. But your professor probably has taught you the tale of Columbus as a villain.
The following happened under the tyranny of Christopher Columbus. These are not alleged crimes. Native Americans were forced to serve Columbus by any horrible cruelty imagined. This included cutting off a nose or ear of those who wouldn't submit. Native Americans were hunted and slaughtered for sport, ripped apart by vicious attack dogs, butchered to provide food for dogs, raped, and women were sold as sex slaves. This included girls as young as 9 years old, forced to mine gold and had a quota. Those who didn't make the quota had their hands cut off and bled to death. Since Catholics weren't supposed to be slaves to other Catholics, and Native Americans were not baptized as part of their conversion. Mass suicide by Native Americans was rampant, a desperate means to escape oppression. The mass extermination of Native Americans under Columbus's rule was one of the most horrifying instances of genocide in human history. So is this what he means by people teaching that Columbus was a villain? Oh, you mean by people teaching history? These things happened. I mean, he's trying to say that this is some kind of made-up propaganda. It's not. This is actual history. Now, what you do with that actual history is up to you. But try to say that if you think Christopher Columbus was a murderous scumbag, that you're somehow anti-American is absolute 100% grade A bullshit. I love America. I think Columbus was a scumbag.
Usually as a starting off point to indict the United States as a whole, often relying on a few key myths and some pivotal lies by omission. So, to start with, I'll bet that you probably believe Columbus and other European settlers to simply have committed mass genocide against Native Americans. Sorry, indigenous. But here's the truth. While there were many examples of brutal warfare between Europeans and Native Americans, neither side actually committed genocide. In fact, there was never an outright policy of Indian extermination.
Oh, there was never an actual policy. Well, that's good to know.
The Native Americans were mostly wiped out through infectious diseases that the settlers had inadvertently brought with them. Of the estimated 250,000 natives in Hispaniola, Columbus's first stop in the Americas in 1492, new infectious diseases wiped out a staggering 95% of their population by 1517.
Columbus and his men slaughtered thousands of people. That doesn't somehow go away. That doesn't get erased because of disease.
As far as genocide by violence, you can look at any historical account of even the most one-sided battles and find that they were still just that. Battles. Take Wounded Knee, although hundreds of years later I only bring it up because I know that if I don't, you will.
When Christopher Columbus came across the Native Americans, he said that they were kind, generous, and peaceful people. Now think about it. When you come across people that are kind, generous, and peaceful, your thought is, well, they were kind, generous, and peaceful to me. I'm going to be kind, generous, and peaceful back. Not Columbus. He took this as meaning, you know what, with 50 armed soldiers, I can conquer these people. When 1493, he didn't come back with 50. He came back with 1,500 armed soldiers, crossbows, attack dogs, and cannons. And imagine unleashing that on a naked and defenseless people. And Stephen Crowder saying, oh, these were battles. No, that's not a battle. The Founding Fathers, they had a battle. They went up against the English. They went up against people that were just as well armed, if not more so, than they were. I mean, remember, it took 8 years to defeat England, and that was only possible with the help of the French. Now, that's true bravery. What Columbus did, that's not a battle. Once again, that is attacking a naked and defenseless people. That is oppressing and slaughtering people by, once again, Columbus's own words, were peaceful, kind, and generous. The man was a scumbag.
It's become ubiquitous with the idea of Native American genocide. After all, there were 150 to 350 Aboriginals killed or wounded. That's terrible. But there were also 25 American soldiers killed and 39 wounded. That's not genocide. That's a one-sided beatdown with Old Glory wielding the hammer.
This has absolutely nothing to do with Christopher Columbus. This is a distraction technique. This is blowing smoke. Hey, look at these battles that have nothing to do with Columbus did, that happened hundreds of years later. Yeah, let's talk about the British fighting the Zulus and look at how people died on both sides. This is never mind the man behind the curtain. Pay attention to the smoke. Pay attention to the flashing lights. This is really dishonest. Just a cheap distraction technique. I mean, this is pathetic.
And sometimes the massacres went the other direction. See the Apaches for reference, or the Comanches, or a dozen or so other tribes. So the natives often gave as good as they got. Not exactly the way genocide usually tends to work.
Nothing to do with what happened with Columbus.
Here's another thing I bet you've been made to believe. That many Native Americans, American Indians, I don't know what, take your pick, lived in harmony with the environment until Columbus arrived and European settlers destroyed the land with their evil technology. Truth, not only did the natives brutally take out people, but they took out entire forests and hunted species to extinction. Squatting Bear and his First Nation buddies weren't hopping into kayaks to block whaling ships, probably because they were too busy killing seals to waterproof their kayaks. You also probably believe that the Native American, two-spirited First Nation something or other culture was a beautiful, pantheistic one of peace. The truth is, not so much. When Columbus arrived, the islands were inhabited by two main tribes. The Arawaks, who were passive and friendly, and the Caribs, who were vicious cannibals. The Arawaks actually lived in fear of the Caribs for, you guessed it, the reasons being that they hunted them down to enslave them and eat them. Yes, eat them. Ironically, we get the name Caribbean Islands from those famous people eaters. The only way settlers were able to conquer this land was through the help of Native Americans who teamed up with them to settle the score with other tribes who were even bigger jerks than they were. That's not even to mention the populations in Central and South America famous for ritual human sacrifice. You think Cortez was able to command and conquer with only 500 or so conquistadors? Of course not. It took 50,000 screaming, angry allied natives who'd had it up to here with being tortured, enslaved, and forced to carry gold for the other native Aztecs.
More smoke, more distraction. Once again, Columbus came across a group of Native Americans by their own acts, by his own words, peaceful, generous, kind, by his own words. That's what he ran into. How many stories is this guy going to tell? I mean, this is, what history are we supposed to be covering here? What story are we supposed to be covering? I thought this was about Columbus Day, like Christopher Columbus. Maybe we should talk more about him. But there's a reason why he's not doing it. There's a reason why he's going off on these wild tangents, going hundreds of years after Columbus's initial voyage. Because if you get into the weeds about what Christopher Columbus actually did, then he's really not looking like a hero. But so rather than being honest about it, Crowder is just playing this game, just blowing smoke. Once again, it's really pathetic.
At some point, they decided to roll the dice and go with the guys sporting funny beards and metal hats. None of this is to say that the early settlers were perfect, or that they didn't carry out their fair share of pretty scummy stuff, but to use America's mistakes as the brush with which to paint the entirety of its history while
This has nothing to do with the United States of America, which didn't come into existence until hundreds of years after Columbus.
completely ignoring the indigenous lifestyle of barbarism and borderline evil is inaccurate at best, dishonest at worst. There were plenty of bloody, horrendous battles between the Europeans and the Indians. When a Neolithic tribe encounters a more technologically advanced people, the guys with the boom-boom sticks usually win. Columbus is not the issue here and never was. This whole Indigenous Peoples Day charade is about teaching your children to despise Western civilization and anybody who dare defend it.
No, it's about researching the actual history of Christopher Columbus and realizing he was a scumbag.
But, and again, that could just be my Western civ privilege talking. Happy Columbus Day.
Anybody who studies history and philosophy should really appreciate what the founding fathers of the United States of America accomplished. When you look at the foundation of our nation, it has many sources. It was a result of the Enlightenment, a philosophical movement that changed the world. Our influences include the ancient Greeks. The first democracy was formed in Athens during the 6th century BCE. The ancient Romans. The Romans adopted a republic long before Christianity was a religion. The Renaissance, a reawakening once again of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, philosopher John Locke, social contract theory, more ancient Greek influence, the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, Native American influence, where we took parts of what they had as far as what they were using as governing documents and incorporated into ours. What the Founding Fathers created, a country based on individual rights and liberties. All men are created equal, right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom to protest government, freedom to protest peacefully, individual rights and liberties. This is something to be proud of. This is something to adopt, something to love. This is great philosophy that our country was founded on. And there's absolutely no need to heroify Christopher Columbus to appreciate what we have in the United States of America, the rights we have being United States citizens. There is no need to heroify a monster that once again had nothing to do with our country, whose initial voyage happened hundreds of years before our country even existed. There's no need for it. It came about in 1930s. That's when Columbus Day came about, and it came about through well-coordinated propaganda and lies. You want to talk about propaganda? The fact that we celebrate Columbus was propaganda, is in dishonest propaganda, not telling the truth about what he was. And we can do better. There are fantastic heroes in history, and how many of them actually get a holiday? And instead of giving a holiday to John Smith, someone who actually had a lot to do with the founding of the United States, going back to the first English colonies, and a hero of one of those colonies, helping that colony succeed and establishing that relationship with Native Americans to help them succeed. That's something we can be celebrating. There's plenty of people throughout history that we can give a day to. So why are we wasting it on Christopher Columbus, who once again never sailed to North America, had nothing to do with the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, Bill of Rights, and who was a murderous piece of shit? There's no reason for it. That's not American-hating propaganda. That's actually just reading actual history and doing rational evaluation. Anyway, thanks for watching. This is Jim Wall. Until next time.
Cisco, do we have to leave all our good friends now?
Only until next time, Pancho. Adios, amigos.